The acoustics in Le Bernardin were designed to dampen the sound of clinking silverware, but they did nothing to muffle the sound of a breaking heart, or in Elena Vance's case, the sound of a shackle snapping open. She sat opposite Julian, her husband of 5 years, watching him inspect the wine list with that infuriatingly passive focus he applied to everything. He adjusted his glasses, wire-rimmed, cheap, or at least they looked cheap compared to the Cartier frames Marcus wore, and murmured something polite to the sommelier. Elena checked her watch. The Patek Philippe face gleamed under the ambient lighting. 8:15 p.m. She had a strategy meeting at 10 o'clock p.m. for the Helios acquisition. She didn't have time for the tasting menu, and she certainly didn't have time for another year of this marriage. "They have the vintage Riesling you like," Julian said, his voice soft, lacking the baritone command Elena had grown accustomed to in the boardroom. He looked up, offering a tentative smile. "Happy anniversary, Elle." "Don't call me that," she said. The sharpness of her tone made the sommelier retreat instantly, vanishing into the shadows of the dining room. Julian's smile faltered, then died. He placed the menu down. "Okay, is something wrong at the firm? Is it the Helios deal?" "It is the Helios deal," Elena lied, though it was only a partial lie. Everything was about the Helios deal. It was the billion-dollar golden ticket that would elevate her from a vice president to a managing partner. It was the future, and sitting across from her was the past. She reached into her Hermès Birkin bag, bypassing the small, velvet-wrapped gift box she knew Julian was waiting to give her. Instead, she pulled out a manila envelope. It was thick, heavy, and final. She slid it across the pristine white tablecloth. It knocked over the crystal salt shaker. "What is this, Julian asked. He didn't touch it. "Freedom," Elena said, taking a sip of water to wash down the bile of guilt, which tasted surprisingly like adrenaline. "For both of us. Mostly for me." Julian stared at the envelope. He didn't need to open it to know what it contained. The air between them grew cold, freezing the warmth of the restaurant. "Divorce papers? On our anniversary? I didn't want to waste another day pretending, Julian. It's cruel to drag this out." She leaned forward, her eyes hardening. "Look at us. Look at where I am, and look at where you are." "I thought we were in the same place," Julian said quietly. "We live in the same apartment. We sleep in the same bed." "Geographically, yes. But intellectually? Socially?" Elena let out a short, derisive laugh. It was a sound she used often in negotiations to belittle junior associates. "I am handling mergers that shape the American economy. I spend my days with sharks, Julian. I fight wars, and I come home to—" "What? You sitting on the balcony, writing essays that nobody reads, tinkering with your little consulting projects?" "My work pays—" "The bills, Elena." "Your work pays for the groceries," she corrected, her voice dripping with disdain. "My work pays for the mortgage. My work pays for the Hamptons house. My work pays for the life you enjoy." Julian went very still. His eyes, usually warm and brown like aged whiskey, turned opaque. "I never asked for the Hamptons house. I was happy in the loft in Brooklyn." "That's exactly the problem," Elena hissed, keeping her voice low but intense. "You are happy with small. You are content with mediocrity. You have no drive, Julian. You're like an anchor. For the last 2 years, I have been swimming with weights on my ankles. I need to fly. Especially now." "Because of Helios?" "Because of everything," she snapped. "But yes, Helios. The owner of that company, whoever he is, built an empire from nothing. That is the kind of energy I need around me. I need a partner who challenges me, not a dependent I have to apologize for at galas." She saw the flinch. It was microscopic, a tiny tightening of his jaw, but she saw it. Good. She needed him to hate her. It would make the logistics easier. "Is there someone else?" Julian asked. The question was devoid of jealousy, which annoyed her. It was just factual. It doesn't matter, Elena deflected, though Marcus's image flashed in her mind. His confidence, his power suits, the way he commanded a room. This is about you and me. It's about the fact that I look at you and I feel bored, Julian. I feel suffocated by your lack of ambition. She stood up. The movement was abrupt, drawing the eyes of neighboring diners. She didn't care. She thrived on attention. The apartment is yours for the next 2 weeks. I'm staying at the Four Seasons. My lawyers have outlined a generous settlement. You won't have to work your little freelance jobs for a few years. She looked down at him one last time. He seemed smaller than she remembered. A man shrinking into the oversized leather chair. A pathetic figure. Sign the papers, Julian. Don't fight me on this. You know you can't afford the legal fees to fight me anyway. She turned on her heel, the click-clack of her Louboutins sounding like gunshots on the polished floor. She didn't look back. If she had, she might have seen that Julian didn't look devastated. He didn't look like a man whose world had ended. As Elena exited the revolving doors into the crisp Manhattan night, inhaling the exhaust and money of the city, Julian remained at the table. He slowly picked up his glass of water, took a calm sip, and then reached into his jacket pocket. He didn't pull out a tissue to wipe away tears. He pulled out a phone. Not the cracked iPhone he used around Elena, but a sleek, black satellite device with no brand markings. He dialed a single number. "Sir?" A voice answered instantly on the other end. "It's done," Julian said. His voice had changed. The softness was gone, replaced by a baritone resonance that commanded absolute obedience. She initiated the separation. "I'm sorry to hear that, sir." "Don't be. It clarifies things." Julian looked at the manila envelope, then pushed it aside as if it were trash. "The acquisition of Helios Capital. Where are we with Sterling and Cross?" "They are desperate, sir. Elena Vance is leading the negotiation team. She's pushing for a face-to-face with the ownership to finalize the price." Julian's lips curled into a smile that never reached his eyes. It was a cold, predatory expression that would have terrified the woman who had just called him an anchor. "Grant the meeting," Julian ordered. "Set it for Monday. And tell the board I'm coming out of the shadows. It's time the buyer met the seller." "Understood, Mr. Vance. Shall I prepare the press release?" "No, Julian said, signaling for the check. "Let her find out in the room. I want to see her face when she realizes exactly who she dumped." The suite at the Four Seasons overlooked Central Park, a dark rectangle of void amidst the glittering grid of Manhattan. Elena stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, a flute of Dom Perignon in her hand. The bubbles fizzed against her lip, sharp and cold, mirroring the sensation in her chest. She expected to feel remorse. She had read about it in novels, the lingering ache of ending a marriage, the phantom limb sensation of a missing partner. But as she watched the headlights stream down 57th Street, all she felt was the intoxicating rush of an altitude change. She had cut the ballast. She was rising. "You look like a woman who just won the lottery," a voice purred from behind her. Marcus Thorne slid his arms around her waist. His suit jacket was off, his silk tie loosened just enough to suggest intimacy without losing professionalism. He smelled of sandalwood and expensive ambition. "Better," Elena murmured, leaning back into him. "I just dropped the losing ticket." Marcus chuckled, the vibration rumbling against her spine. How did he take it? Did he cry? Did he beg? "He was quiet," Elena said, frowning slightly as the memory of Julian's impassive face flickered in her mind. He just sat there. It was pathetic, really. No fight, no passion, just resignation. It confirmed everything I thought about him. He's a man who lets life happen to him rather than making it happen. "Well, he's history," Marcus said, turning her around and clinking his glass against hers. "And we are the future. I spoke to the partners at Sterling and Cross. If you land the Helios deal, the managing partner office is yours. and with me at your side, we'll run this city, El." Elena smiled, but her eyes drifted past him to the reflection in the glass. Marcus was perfect on paper, a shark, a winner, a mirror of her own desires. Yet, for a split second, she missed the way Julian would make her tea without asking when she came home late. She shook her head, dismissing the thought as weakness. Sentimentality was for people who couldn't afford power. "To Helios," she toasted. "To the kill," Marcus corrected, drinking deep. 3 miles south, the atmosphere was entirely different. The apartment in Tribeca was silent. It was a beautiful space, an industrial loft with exposed brick and iron beams that Julian had bought under a shell company long before he met Elena. She had always complained it was too drafty and lacked the prestige of the Upper East Side. She never knew he owned the entire building. Julian sat at his desk in the corner of the living room, the writer's nook, Elena called it. He reached up and removed the wire-rimmed glasses, placing them on the desk. He didn't need them. They were a prop, a piece of armor designed to soften his sharp features, to make him look harmless, academic, manageable. Without them, his face changed. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by the cold calculation of a man who specialized in distressed assets and hostile takeovers. He opened the bottom drawer of the desk and pressed his thumb against a biometric scanner hidden beneath the wood. A click echoed in the quiet room. The false back of the drawer slid open, revealing a laptop that looked like a piece of military hardware. He booted it up. The screen didn't show a standard operating system. It showed the live data streams of the global markets, Tokyo opening, London closing, the fluctuating heartbeats of currencies and commodities, and in the center, the logo of Helios Capital. His phone buzzed. It was the secure line again. "Mr. Vance," the voice of Elias, his chief of staff, came through clearly. "The legal team has received the preliminary divorce filing from Mrs. Vance's attorneys. They moved fast." "She likes efficiency," Julian said. His voice was dry, stripped of emotion. "What are the terms?" "Standard aggression. She's offering a lump sum to buy out your interest in the marital assets, claiming she was the sole breadwinner. She wants you to sign an NDA regarding her business dealings. She's worried you might leak secrets about Sterling and Cross." Julian let out a short, dark laugh. "She thinks I'm a liability. She has no idea I'm the judge, jury, and executioner." "Instructions, sir?" "Accept the terms," Julian said. "Sir?" Elias sounded surprised. "You could crush her in court. We could expose her adultery with Thorne, freeze her assets." "No," Julian cut him off. "I don't want her money. I want her to feel safe. I want her to feel victorious. Let her think she's cleared the board. Hubris is the most flammable element in the world, Elias. I want her standing in the middle of a bonfire before she realizes she's holding the match." Julian's fingers flew across the keyboard. He pulled up the acquisition file for Helios Capital. Sterling and Cross had offered $1.2 billion. It was a fair evaluation, but the structure was sloppy. Elena was relying on leveraged debt, assuming Helios was desperate to sell. "Regarding the acquisition," Julian continued, his eyes scanning the flawed proposal Elena had written. "Send a counterproposal to Sterling and Cross tomorrow morning at 8:00 a.m. "The terms?" "We accept the price," Julian said, "but we reject the proxy negotiation. I am invoking the founder's prerogative. I will not sign the sale over to a legal team or a vice president. The final due diligence meeting must be conducted in person, with the lead negotiator from their side and the principal owner of Helios." "You're going to reveal yourself?" "Not yet. Tell them the owner is a recluse. Tell them he's eccentric. Tell them he demands to look the buyer in the eye to ensure his legacy is in good hands." Julian paused, looking at the empty space on the bookshelf where Elena's photo used to sit. Tell them the meeting is non-negotiable. If Elena Vance wants the deal, she has to come to the lion's den. It will be done, sir. And Elias? Yes? Make sure the meeting room is the one with the glass walls. I want the entire office to see it. Julian ended the call. He closed the laptop and walked to the window. The city lights reflected in his eyes, cold and distant. He had spent 5 years trying to be the man Elena wanted. Supportive, gentle, present. He had dimmed his own light so she could shine. And she had despised him for it. She wanted a monster? She wanted a titan of industry? Be careful what you wish for, Elle, he whispered to the empty loft. He turned off the lights, leaving the apartment in darkness, save for the blinking red light of the server, pulsing like a heartbeat waiting to accelerate. The game had begun. The morning sun hit the glass facade of the Sterling & Cross building like a spotlight, and Elena Vance walked through the lobby as if she were the star of the show. She wore a suit of crimson silk, a color chosen deliberately. Red was aggression. Red was power. Red was the color of blood in the water, and today she was the shark. Coffee black, 3 shots, she barked at her assistant Clara, without breaking stride as she swept past the reception desk. And get the acquisition team in the conference room. Now. Yes, Ms. Vance. The team from Helios Capital responded to our counteroffer, Clara stammered, struggling to keep pace in her sensible heels while Elena's stilettos clicked a rhythmic, militaristic beat. Elena stopped dead in the hallway. The bustling office around them seemed to freeze. And they accepted the price, Clara said, breathless. But there's a condition. Elena snatched the tablet from Clara's hands. Her eyes scanned the email, skipping the legal pleasantries to find the core demand. Her lips curved into a smile that was equal parts relief and arrogance. The principal owner requires a personal verification meeting. Monday, 10:15 a.m. He wants to see me, Elena murmured, handing the tablet back. The old recluse wants to see the woman who conquered his empire. Is that a problem? Clara asked nervously. Rumors say the owner of Helios is difficult. They call him the Ghost. No one at the firm has ever seen his face. He's a man, Clara, Elena scoffed, resuming her march toward the elevator. Men are simple. They either want to be feared or they want to be seduced. I can handle both. Unlike the men I'm used to dealing with at home, this one clearly has a spine if he built Helios. I respect that. The conference room at Sterling & Cross was a sanctuary of polished mahogany and panoramic views of the Hudson River. Marcus Thorne was already there, leaning back in a leather chair, tossing a stress ball in the air with practiced nonchalance. So, Marcus said as Elena entered, his eyes raking over her red suit with appreciation. We got the green light? Better, Elena said, throwing her portfolio onto the table. We got an audience. The owner wants a sit-down. The ghost? Marcus whistled. Careful, Elle. Legend has it he eats vice presidents for breakfast. He's never signed a deal without dissecting the buyer first. I'm not a vice president, Elena corrected, taking her seat at the head of the table. After this deal, I'm a partner, and I'm not worried about some eccentric billionaire. He's probably 80 years old, hiding behind a curtain because he's afraid of the modern market. I'll walk in there, stroke his ego, promise to keep his legacy safe, and walk out with the signature. She looked around the room at her team, 6 young, hungry analysts who looked at her with a mixture of awe and terror. Listen to me, she commanded. I want a full psychological profile on whoever runs Helios. Dig into the shell companies, find out his hobbies, his political donations, his favorite scotch. If he has a dog, I want to know its name. I want to know him better than he knows himself before I step into that room. We've tried, Elena, one of the senior analysts said. He's a digital void, no photos, no interviews, just a signature, JV. JV, Elena repeated. Initials. How quaint. She felt a vibration in her pocket. It was a notification from her lawyer. Divorce papers delivered, receipt confirmed. A strange sensation rippled through her. Not regret, but a phantom itch. She thought of Julian. If he were here, he would be cautioning her. He would say something annoying, like, "Don't underestimate quiet people, Elena. Silence isn't always empty. Sometimes it's full of answers." God, she hated that philosophical drivel. It was the talk of a man who couldn't afford to be loud. "Focus," Elena snapped, banishing Julian's voice from her head. "If we don't have data, we use leverage. We go in with the financials. We show him that without Sterling and Cross, his precious fund is going to stagnate. We dominate the room. That is the strategy. Weakness is not an option." Marcus stood up and walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. It was a territorial gesture, one he wouldn't have dared make a week ago. "You're on fire today." "I'm free, Marcus," she whispered, leaning into his touch, just enough to be unprofessional. I finally dropped the dead weight. Later that evening, Elena returned to the penthouse. It felt different now, spacious, echoing. She had ordered a cleaning crew to box up Julian's things while she was at work. The hallway was lined with cardboard boxes marked "Donation" and "Julian." She walked past them with a glass of wine in hand, feeling like a tourist in her own life. She stopped at the box marked "Desk Items." On top lay the velvet box he had tried to give her at the restaurant. Curiosity, or perhaps a final twist of cruelty, made her pick it up. She flipped the lid open. Inside wasn't a diamond necklace or a watch. It was a silver key, an antique heavy iron key, polished to a shine. Underneath it was a small note, written in Julian's neat, compact handwriting. "To the lock that only we can open. For our future home." Elena stared at it. A key? To what? A storage unit? A rustic cabin in the woods? It was so typically Julian, cryptic, sentimental, and practically useless. He probably bought some fixer-upper in upstate New York, thinking she would want to spend her weekends renovating a barn instead of networking in the Hamptons. She laughed, a harsh sound in the empty room. "You never knew me at all, did you?" She tossed the box back into the cardboard carton. She didn't need keys to the past. She had the key card to the executive elevator. Her phone rang. It was Marcus. "Ready for the big day?" "I was born ready," Elena replied, turning her back on the boxes. "Tomorrow, we take Helios, and then we take over everything. Get some sleep, killer. You need to look sharp." Elena hung up and walked to the window, looking out at the skyline. Somewhere out there, the mysterious JV was waiting for her. She imagined a frail old man, intimidated by her reputation, ready to hand over the keys to his kingdom. She took a sip of wine, savoring the taste of victory. She had no idea that the man waiting for her wasn't old, wasn't frail, and wasn't a stranger. She had no idea that the dead weight she had discarded was about to drop on her head like an anvil. "Bring it on," she whispered to the city. Helios Capital did not look like a financial firm. It looked like a vault. Located on the 80th floor of One World Trade Center, the lobby was a study in intimidation. There was no receptionist, only a biometric scanner and a wall of silence. The air was cooler here than in the streets below, filtered to a sterile purity that smelled of ozone and money. Elena checked her reflection in the blackened glass of the elevator doors. Her lipstick was a perfect crimson, her hair pulled back in a severe, flawless chignon. Beside her, Marcus Thorne adjusted his tie for the third time. He was nervous. The rumors about the ghost had clearly gotten to him. "Relax, Marcus," Elena said, though her own pulse was hammering a strange rhythm against her ribs. "It's just a meeting. We hold the money. We hold the power." "We hold the boffer," Marcus corrected, his voice tight. He holds the asset, and nobody knows what he wants. The elevator chimed, a soft, polite sound that echoed too loudly in the quiet space. The doors slid open. They were ushered into the main boardroom by a woman who introduced herself as the chief legal officer. She didn't smile. She didn't offer coffee. She simply pointed to the chairs on one side of a massive table made of a single slab of black obsidian. "The chairman will be with you shortly," she said, and then she sat down, opening a laptop. Elena sat. She looked around. The room was surrounded by glass walls, offering a vertigo-inducing view of the city she desperately wanted to rule. But what caught her eye was the stillness. In her office, people ran, shouted through phones. Here, the staff moved like ghosts, efficient, silent, terrifyingly competent. 10 minutes passed, then 20. "This is a power play," Marcus whispered, checking his watch. "He's making us sweat." "Let him," Elena said, drumming her manicured fingernails on the obsidian table. "It just means he's insecure. He needs to establish dominance before he—" The double doors at the far end of the room opened. The sound cut Elena off mid-sentence. The room's temperature seemed to drop another 5 degrees. 3 men in dark suits entered first, carrying files. They stood at attention, flanking the head of the table. Then, a hush fell over the room, heavy and absolute. "Gentlemen, Ms. Vance," the legal officer said, standing up, "the chairman of Helios Capital." A figure walked through the door. Elena prepared her smile, the one she used to disarm older men. She prepared her opening line. She looked up, and the world stopped. The man was tall, wearing a bespoke navy suit that fit his frame with architectural precision. His shoes were Italian leather, polished to a mirror shine. He walked with a predator's grace, fluid, silent, commanding space rather than just occupying it. But it wasn't the suit. It wasn't the shoes. It was the face. Elena's breath hitched in her throat, a strangled gasp that sounded like a dying bird. Her brain misfired, frantically trying to reject the visual data it was receiving. It was a hallucination. It had to be stress. It had to be the divorce. Because the man walking toward the head of the table was Julian. But it wasn't her Julian. This wasn't the man in the cardigan who forgot to take out the recycling. This wasn't the struggling writer who sat on the balcony staring at clouds. This man's eyes were sharp, intelligent, and terrifyingly cold. He didn't look down. He looked straight ahead, his gaze sweeping over the room with the indifference of a king surveying his subjects. "Julian?" The name escaped Elena's lips before she could stop it. It was a whisper, weak and trembling. Marcus froze. He looked from Elena to the chairman, his mouth slightly open. You know him?" Julian didn't answer. He didn't even blink. He reached the head of the table and placed a single, slim folder on the obsidian surface. He unbuttoned his jacket with one hand and sat down. The movement was elegant, practiced. He looked at Marcus, then slowly, agonizingly, turned his gaze to Elena. There was no love in those brown eyes. There was no hate either. There was only a vast, empty distance, like looking at a stranger across a canyon. "Good morning," Julian said. His voice was the same baritone she knew, but stripped of all warmth, honed into a weapon. "I believe you are here to buy my company. Shall we begin?" Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands, hidden under the table, began to shake violently. The room was spinning. "He owns this? All of this?" Elena stammered. The great negotiator, the shark of Wall Street, couldn't find a single word. You're the chairman?" "Is that a relevant question for due diligence, Ms. Vance?" Julian asked. He didn't call her Elena. He didn't call her Elle. "If you are confused about the ownership structure, perhaps you didn't read the prospectus thoroughly. My initials are on every page. J.V. Julian Vance. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. The useless husband she had mocked 3 days ago, the man she had called an anchor, a failure, a burden, was the hidden king of New York finance. But, Marcus interjected, trying to salvage the situation, though his voice cracked. Mr. Vance, we were under the impression, Elena said her husband was a writer. Julian's eyes flicked to Marcus. It was a look of such withering dismissal that Marcus actually leaned back in his chair. I write, Julian said calm. I write checks. I write contracts. And occasionally, when I am bored, I write the destinies of companies like yours. He opened the folder. Now, Julian continued, clasping his hands together, hands that Elena had held 1,000 times, hands she thought she knew. You offered $1.2 billion, a respectable number. But before I sign, I have some questions about your competency to manage my assets, specifically regarding your judgment of value. He looked at Elena. A ghost of a smile played on his lips, cruel, knowing, and utterly devastating. Tell me, Ms. Vance, are you good at spotting potential? Or do you have a habit of discarding things before you realize what they are actually worth? Elena couldn't breathe. She was trapped in a glass box, and the walls were closing in. The silence in the boardroom was heavy enough to crush lungs. It wasn't the quiet of a library. It was the vacuum of space. Elena Vance gripped the edge of the obsidian table until her knuckles turned white. Her mind was a frantic kaleidoscope of memories. Julian in his pajamas brewing coffee, Julian fixing the leaky faucet, Julian listening to her rant about her useless coworkers. She tried to superimpose those images over the man sitting across from her, but they wouldn't stick. The man in the navy suit was a stranger who held her career in his manicured hands. I asked you a question, Ms. Vance, Julian said softly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The acoustic design of the room carried his baritone to every corner. Do you have an eye for value? Or are you easily distracted by shiny, hollow things? He glanced briefly at Marcus, then back to her. The implication was a blade sliding between her ribs. Mr. Vance, Elena managed to say. Her voice was steady, a testament to years of boardroom warfare, though her insides were liquefying. We are here to discuss the acquisition of Helios Capital. My personal life is not on the agenda. Everything is on the agenda, Julian corrected. He opened the folder in front of him. You are asking me to entrust my life's work, my empire, to your leadership. Character is a metric of risk, and your character has recently come into question. Marcus cleared his throat, sensing the walls closing in. Now hold on, Mr. Vance. Sterling & Cross is offering a 20% premium over market value. It's a generous offer. Business is business. Julian turned his head slowly. He looked at Marcus as if he were a smudge on a window pane. You must be Marcus Thorne, Julian said, the visionary behind the aggressive expansion strategy. I've read your file. Marcus puffed out his chest slightly. I like to think I bring energy to the table. You bring volatility, Julian said, dropping a sheet of paper onto the table. It slid across the smooth surface and stopped perfectly in front of Marcus. Your portfolio is riddled with high-risk, short-term gains that collapse within 3 years. You build houses of cards and call them castles. Julian leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Elena's. Which brings me to your proposal, Ms. Vance. I've reviewed your restructuring plan for Helios. Elena swallowed. She had written that plan 3 nights ago, while lying in bed next to Marcus, mocking Julian's lack of ambition. It's a solid plan, she defended. We streamline operations. We cut the dead weight. Dead weight, Julian repeated. The words hung in the air. You use that phrase often. In this document, you've listed my research and development division as dead weight
Because it hasn't turned a profit in 2 quarters. You want to liquidate it. It's a drain on resources, Elena insisted, falling back on her corporate script. To fly, you have to cut the ballast. That division, Julian said, his voice dangerously low, is developing sustainable energy grids for developing nations. It is the soul of this company. It is the reason Helios exists. But you wouldn't see that, would you? He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. You only look at the bottom line, Elena. You look at a seed and see dirt, not a tree. You looked at a husband who supported you, who gave you a sanctuary from this chaotic world, and you saw an anchor. He turned back to face
them. The sun framed his silhouette, making him look immense. You want to acquire Helios? Fine, but I have questions about your due diligence. On page 40 of your proposal, you claim to have intimate knowledge of the market. Yet, you lived with the founder of this company for 5 years and didn't know what he did for a living. Elena flinched. You lied to me. You hid it. I didn't hide it, Julian countered. I just didn't broadcast it. I wanted a home, Elena, not a networking event. I wanted a wife who loved me, not for my net worth. I wanted to see if you were capable of loving a man who couldn't advance your career. He paused, letting the silence stretch. I got my answer last Friday, at Le Bernardin. Elena felt tears stinging her eyes. Tears of humiliation, not sorrow. She looked at Marcus for support, but Marcus was staring at the table, studying the grain of the wood, desperately trying to become invisible. So, Julian said, returning to his seat and picking up a gold fountain pen. Here is the situation. Your offer relies on leveraged debt. If this deal fails, Sterling & Cross's stock will plummet. You, specifically, will be blamed. Your career will be, what was the word? Mediocre. What do you want, Julian? Elena whispered. Do you want me to beg? Is that it? You want revenge? Revenge is a waste of energy, Julian said, checking his watch. I want competency. I'm going to counteroffer. I will sell Helios to Sterling & Cross, but not under your current terms. He scribbled something on the document and slid it back to them. I am stripping the golden parachute clause for the acquiring executives. If the company's value drops under your leadership, you get nothing. No severance, no bonus. You walk away with 0. He looked at Marcus. And Mr. Thorne is removed from the deal entirely. I don't do business with people who poach another man's assets, be it companies or wives. Marcus's head snapped up. You can't do that. I'm the lead partner on the financing. Not anymore, Julian said calmly. If you want my signature, Marcus leaves the room now. Elena looked at Marcus. This was the man she had blown up her life for, the man she thought was a king. Marcus looked at the door, then at the billion-dollar contract, then at Elena. The calculation in his eyes was naked and ugly. He didn't look at her with love. He looked at her as a liability. Elena, Marcus said, his voice trembling but resolved. It's a billion-dollar deal. The partners will kill us if we walk away. So you're leaving? Elena asked, her voice breaking. I'll wait in the lobby, Marcus said, standing up. He didn't touch her shoulder. He didn't offer a reassuring glance. He grabbed his briefcase and walked out of the room without looking back. The door clicked shut. Elena was alone with the husband she had discarded. The room felt vast, cold, and terrifying. There, Julian said, capping his pen. Now the dead weight is gone. He leaned back, his eyes drilling into hers. Now let's talk about the real cost of your ambition, Elena, because I'm not just the seller today. I'm the bill collector. The latch of the heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing the room. The sound was final, like a gavel striking a block. Elena stared at the wood grain of the door where Marcus had just exited. Her mind replayed the last 10 seconds on a loop. The hesitation in his eyes,
the way he grabbed his briefcase, the speed with which he chose his commission over her dignity. She had burned her life down for him. She had humiliated a good man for him. And at the first sign of turbulence, he had ejected. "He runs fast," Julian observed, breaking the silence. He was still seated at the head of the table, watching her with that terrifying clinical detachment. But then again, rats usually do when the ship starts to list. Elena slowly turned her head back to him. The adrenaline that had sustained her was leaking out, replaced by a cold, numbing dread. She straightened her spine, relying on the muscle memory of 1,000 high-stakes meetings. "He made a business decision," Elena said, though the words tasted like ash. "He's protecting the firm." "He's protecting himself," Julian corrected. "Just like you thought you were doing when you handed me that envelope at dinner. You two are perfect for each other. Transactional, hollow." He stood up and walked over to the sideboard, pouring a glass of water from a crystal pitcher. The domesticity of the action, the way his wrist turned, the way he held the glass, was so familiar it made Elena's chest ache. It was a ghost of the husband she had killed. "Why are you doing this, Julian?" she asked, her voice losing its edge. "If you wanted to destroy me, you could have just rejected the deal via email. Why bring me here? Why the theater?" Julian took a sip of water, watching her over the rim of the glass. "Because I needed to know if there was anything left," he said. "I needed to know if the Elena I married was still in there somewhere, buried under the ambition and the designer labels, or if she was truly gone." He set the glass down and walked toward her. He didn't stop until he was standing right beside her chair. He smelled of the same soap he always used, a scent of rain and clean linen, but underneath it was the sterile smell of this skyscraper. "You called me a failure, Elena. You said I lacked drive. You said you wanted a man who could stand beside you at the top." He gestured to the room, to the panoramic view of Manhattan sprawling beneath them, to the empire he commanded. "Here I am. I am at the top. I am the man you said you wanted. Does it feel the way you imagined?" Elena looked up at him. The tragedy wasn't that he was angry, it was that he was right. She had wished for a titan, and now that titan was looming over her, casting a shadow that swallowed her whole. "I didn't know," she whispered. "You never told me." "Would it have mattered?" Julian asked, leaning down, his face inches from hers. "If I had told you on our first date that I was worth 10 figures, would you have loved me? Or would you have loved the portfolio? I hid it to protect us, Elena. You exposed it to destroy us." He straightened up and walked back to his chair, putting the distance of the table between them again. He picked up the contract. "Let's talk about your future, because right now it's very fragile." Elena wiped a treacherous tear from her cheek with a furious swipe of her hand. "I am the vice president of Sterling and Cross. I am good at my job." "You are," Julian agreed. "But you are here to buy a company that specializes in distressed assets. And right now, you are the distressed asset." He tapped the paper. "If you walk out of this room without this deal, your board will fire you. Marcus has already abandoned you. He'll pin the failure on your personal conflict with the seller. You'll be toxic. No major firm in New York will hire a squabbling executive who blew $1 billion merger because of a bad divorce." Elena felt the walls of the room pressing against her skin. He had checkmated her. He had mapped out her demise with the same precision he used to acquire companies. "So what is the price?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Not the money. What is the price for you to sign?" Julian looked at her for a long moment. His expression softened, but it wasn't with kindness. It was with pity. And that was worse. "I want you to say it," Julian said. "Say what?" "I want you to admit that you were wrong. Not about the marriage. That's over. But about me. I want you to admit that the mediocrity you despised was actually the only thing keeping you grounded. I want you to admit
That you didn't leave me because I wasn't enough, but because you were too empty to appreciate what you had. Elena gripped the armrests of her leather chair. Her pride was the last thing she had left. It was the armor that had protected her since she was a child fighting for her place in the world. To strip it off now, in front of him. But she looked at the contract. She looked at the door where Marcus had fled. She looked at the city below. A city that didn't care about her feelings, only her success. She was trapped. Her voice cracked. She closed her eyes. I was wrong. Louder, Julian commanded. I was wrong, Elena cried out, the words tearing from her throat. I was arrogant. I thought I was better than you. I thought I was the only one carrying the weight. I didn't see you. I didn't see anything. She opened her eyes, tears streaming freely now, ruining her perfect makeup. I wanted the world, Julian, and I thought you were in the way. And now? Julian asked quietly. Now? Elena looked at the empty chair beside her, then back at the powerful stranger in front of her. Now I have the world, and I'm completely alone. Julian held her gaze for a heartbeat longer, absorbing her confession. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply nodded, as if verifying a data point. He uncapped his gold pen. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. He signed the document. The scratching of the nib on the paper was the loudest sound Elena had ever heard. It was the sound of her victory and the sound of her utter defeat. Julian closed the folder and slid it across the obsidian table. It stopped within her reach. Take it, Julian said. It's what you wanted. You own Helios. You're a managing partner now. You won, Elena. He stood up and buttoned his jacket. Now get out of my office. I have real work to do. Elena reached for the folder with a shaking hand. She clutched it to her chest like a shield. She stood up, her legs wobbling in her heels. She wanted to say something, an apology, a plea, a goodbye, but Julian had already turned his back to her. He was looking at the screens on the wall, analyzing market trends, dismissing her as if she were a vendor who had finished a delivery. She turned and walked toward the door. The walk felt like a mile. Every step took her further away from the only person who had ever truly known her. She pushed the door open and stepped into the hallway. Marcus was gone. The lobby was empty. She looked down at the folder in her arms. $1 billion. She had never felt poorer in her life. The celebration at Sterling and Cross was raucous. Champagne corks popped like gunfire, and the boardroom was filled with the electric hum of adrenaline and greed. They had closed the deal of the decade. Elena Vance stood in the center of the room, a glass of vintage Krug in her hand, accepting the handshakes and the envious stares. She was the woman of the hour, the queen of M&A. She had secured the future of the firm. But the champagne tasted like vinegar. Every smile directed at her looked predatory. And every time she looked at the empty chair where Marcus should have been, before she had security escort him out of the building an hour ago, she felt a wave of nausea. She needed to leave. Excellent work, Elena, the senior partner said, clapping her on the shoulder. You're a killer. Thank you, she said mechanically. I need to go home. It's been a long day. She didn't go to the Four Seasons. Her feet, operating on a subconscious homing beacon, carried her back to the Tribeca loft. The apartment was dark when she entered. The only light came from the street lamps outside, casting long prison bar shadows across the floor. She assumed it was empty, but then she saw a silhouette on the balcony. Julian. He was leaning against the railing, looking out at the city, a cigarette burning in his hand, a habit she thought he had quit years ago. He wasn't wearing the intimidating navy suit anymore. He was back in his jeans and a black t-shirt, the uniform of the man she used to know. Elena felt a spark of hope. The armor was off. Maybe, just maybe, the door wasn't locked. She walked out onto the balcony. The night air was cool. I didn't think you'd be here, she said softly. Julian didn't turn around. He took a drag of the cigarette, the embers glowing bright orange in the dark. I came to get the rest of my servers and to leave the keys. You don't have to, Elena said, moving closer. She stopped just within touching distance. Julian, I've been thinking about what happened today. Have you? Yes. I know I hurt you. I know I was blind. Her voice took on a silky, persuasive quality, the same tone she used to close clients, but warmer, desperate. But look at where we are now. You're a titan. I'm a managing partner. We aren't the mismatched couple I thought we were. We're equals now. Power players. She reached out, her fingers grazing his arm. He didn't flinch, but his muscles were as hard as stone. Think about it, she whispered, stepping into his space, smelling the smoke and the rain on his skin. We could be unstoppable. You run the capital, I run the acquisitions. We could build a dynasty, Julian. I understand you now. I respect you. Isn't that what you wanted? A partner who understands the game? She moved her hand up to his chest, feeling the slow, steady beat of his heart. She looked up at him, using every ounce of her beauty, every trick of seduction she knew. Come back to me, she said. Cancel the divorce. Let's run this city together. Julian finally looked down at her. His face was illuminated by the city glow. For a second, Elena thought she saw a flicker of the old warmth. Then he gently took her wrist and removed her hand from his chest. He dropped it as if it were a dead leaf. You still don't get it, he said. His voice was devoid of anger. It was terrifyingly weary. You think I revealed myself today to impress you? To prove I was worthy of you? Didn't you? Elena asked, confused. No, Julian said. I did it to show you that your entire value system is broken. He turned back to the skyline. You're standing here, asking me to take you back. Not because you love me, Elena, but because you realized I'm a good investment. You're looking at me and seeing a balance sheet. You see the chairman of Helios, and that turns you on. But the man who made you soup when you had the flu? The man who held you when your mother died? You threw him away like garbage. I can change, Elena pleaded, her composure cracking. I can be the wife you want. I don't want a wife who changes because she found out I'm rich, Julian said. I wanted a wife who stayed when she thought I was poor. He flicked the cigarette over the railing. It spiraled down into the abyss of the alley below. I tried, Julian, she cried, tears spilling over. I was drowning in pressure. I wanted us to be more. You wanted more, Julian corrected. I just wanted us. He walked past her, back into the living room. Elena followed him, desperate, grabbing his arm. Do you hate me? She sobbed. Is that it? You hate me for the affair? For the insults? Julian stopped. He looked at her hand on his arm, then up into her tear-streaked face. Hate implies passion, Elena, he said quietly. It implies that I still have an emotional investment in you. He gently pulled his arm free. I don't hate you. I don't know you. The woman I loved died the moment she walked into that restaurant and mocked my life. You're just a stranger with a very expensive contract. He walked to the kitchen counter and picked up a small duffel bag. The apartment is yours, he said. I bought the building, but I transferred the deed to your name this afternoon. Consider it a severance package. I don't want the apartment, Elena screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. I want you. No, Julian said, opening the front door. You want the ghost, and ghosts, they don't stay. The door clicked shut. Elena stood in the center of the vast, beautiful industrial loft. She had the billion-dollar deal. She had the promotion. She had the luxury apartment. She had won everything she set out to win.
She sank to her knees on the cold hardwood floor, the silence of the room pressing against her ears until it was a physical weight. She was the queen of the world, and she had never been more destitute. 6 months later, New York City was in the grip of a relentless winter. Snow swirled around the glass canyons of Manhattan, turning the city into a monochrome blur of gray and white. Inside the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel, however, it was warm, golden, and scented with lilies and expensive perfume. The Titans of Industry Gala was in full swing. Elena Vance stood at the podium, the spotlight blindingly bright against her eyes. She wore a black velvet gown that cost more than her father's car, and around her neck hung diamonds cold enough to burn her skin. In her hand, she held the heavy crystal trophy, Executive of the Year. "Thank you," she said into the microphone. Her voice was practiced, perfect, and entirely hollow. This merger between Sterling and Cross and Helios Capital represents not just a business transaction, but a vision of the future. A future where ambition knows no limits. Thunderous applause erupted. 600 people, competitors, sycophants, politicians, clapped for her. They envied her. They wanted to be her. Elena smiled the smile she had perfected in the mirror. But as she looked out into the sea of faceless admirers, her eyes involuntarily scanned the back of the room, searching for a shadow, a ghost. He wasn't there. He was never there anymore. An hour later, Elena retreated to the VIP bar, desperate for a moment of silence. She ordered a scotch, neat, Julian's drink. She hated the taste, but she drank it anyway, a daily penance of burning amber. "Congratulations, Ms. Vance." Elena turned. Standing near the entrance was Elias, Julian's former chief of staff. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was in a trench coat, looking like he had just stopped by on his way to somewhere better. "Elias," Elena said, a flicker of genuine emotion crossing her frozen features. She stepped forward, almost eager. Is he here?" Elias shook his head gently. "No, Ms. Vance. Julian doesn't attend these things. You know that." "How is he?" Elena asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I haven't seen him since the closing. I've sent emails, but—" "He blocked the address, Elena," Elias said. He didn't use her title. He spoke with the pity one reserves for the terminally ill. "Where is he?" Elias reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded copy of a niche scientific journal. He placed it on the bar. "He's in Norway," Elias said. "He took the R&D division, the one you wanted to liquidate, and spun it off into a nonprofit. They just cracked the code on a new geothermal grid. He's saving the world, while you're conquering Wall Street." Elena looked down at the magazine. On the cover was a candid photo of Julian. He was wearing a thick parka, standing on a snowy ridge, laughing with a group of engineers. He looked windblown, unshaven, and older, but he looked alive. His eyes crinkled with a genuine joy she hadn't seen in years. He looked free. "He looks happy," Elena whispered, tracing the image with her fingertip. "He is," Elias said. "He met someone there, a marine biologist. She doesn't care about his portfolio." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. The air left her lungs. "I see." Elias buttoned his coat. "He asked me to give you a message if I ever ran into you." Elena looked up, hope flaring in her chest like a dying ember. "What is it?" He said, "Read the fine print." Elias nodded once, then turned and walked out into the snowy night, leaving Elena alone with the noise of the party. Read the fine print. Elena left the gala immediately. She didn't go to the penthouse. She went to the Helios Tower. Her tower now. She sat in the chairman's office, Julian's old office, at 2:00 a.m. The desk was covered in stacks of reports. She unlocked the safe and pulled out the original acquisition contract, the one Julian had signed with that gold pen 6 months ago. She had been so eager to close the deal, so desperate to secure her victory, that she had let the lawyers handle the minutiae. She had only checked the price tag. She turned to the final addendum, the one Julian had added at the last minute. Clause 88, Executive Retention and Performance Protocol. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon, and slowly the color drained from her face. The managing partner, Elena Vance, agrees to remain the sole signatory and operational head of the merged entity for a minimum period of 10 years. Resignation, termination, or sale of shares prior to this date will result in the immediate forfeiture of all personal assets and a retroactive penalty of... Elena dropped the paper. It wasn't a promotion. It was a prison sentence. Julian knew. He knew that the market was turning. He knew that integrating the two massive cultures would be a nightmare. He knew that the regulatory bodies were about to crack down on private equity. He hadn't just sold her the company. He had chained her to the burning deck. She couldn't quit. She couldn't sell. If she left, she would lose everything: the money, the reputation, the penthouse. She was forced to run this machine day after day, year after year, dealing with the stress, the lawsuits, the 100-hour weeks. He had given her exactly what she asked for: absolute power, and he had ensured that she would never have the time or the freedom to enjoy it. She was the queen, yes, but the castle was a cage. Elena stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city of New York sprawled below her, a grid of electric diamonds. It was beautiful. It was cold. It was indifferent. She looked at her reflection in the glass. The businesswoman of the year looked back at her, eyes dark with exhaustion, skin pale, lips pressed in a thin line of regret. She thought of Julian in Norway, laughing in the snow, holding a woman who loved him for who he was. He was writing a new story. Elena realized then that her story was over. The rest of her life would just be a long, slow epilogue of board meetings and quarterly earnings played out in an empty room. She pressed her hand against the cold glass. "You win, Julian," she whispered to the empty office. The silence of the skyscraper answered her. It was the loudest sound she had ever heard.